Good afternoon. I call this meeting to order. We are meeting in public. Welcome to continuation of meeting number 106 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. Thank you all for your cooperation. I would like to welcome few guest members here today that are replacing the regular members. First, I would love to welcome Mr. Arnold to the Immigration Committee. Welcome. And on the Liberal side, we have Mr. Ken McDonald, and welcome. Of course, we have Anju Tillo online. Anju, welcome. And with this, we are discussing the sub-amendment of Mr. Kimmich of the motion of Mr. Chang. At the time of suspension on Thursday, September the 19th, Mr. Kimmich had the floor. The following were on the list to debate the sub-amendment after Mr. Kimmich: MP El Khoury, MP McLean, MP McGuire, MP Reddy-Cobb. Instead of MP McLean, Mr. Arnold, you will take that spot if you wish to. Mr. Kimmich, floor is yours. Thank you.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wanting to ask a question about ministerial appearances. We have, by my math, I think about 6 ministers' appearances that are on the scheduled, and so I was just curious if you've had any communications with the minister's office in terms of when he might be planning to come back to the committee.
Point order, Monsieur le Président. Point order, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I have a question, Mr. Chair. Can we do a point of order for a question to the chair while filibustering? Because if they want to speak about a particular subject, I don't think this point of order is in order. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I just want to clarify that via the clerk, maybe. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to pass it on. We do not have any information from the minister. We'll continue with the debate. Mr. Kimmich, carry on, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I left off with a promise that I was going to continue so that I could read into the public record a letter I've received from the Public School Boards Association of Alberta from President Dennis McNeil. I'm going to read the letter into the record. I'd be more than happy also to table the letter if there's consent from the committee. So this one is addressed to Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and reads as follows. On behalf of the Public School Boards Association of Alberta, I would like to draw your attention to a pressing issue for your consideration. As you are aware, public school divisions are funded entirely by tax dollars. School boards strive to manage these funds responsibly and effectively. However, the introduction and subsequent increases of the carbon tax, and these are capitalized, have significantly raised operational costs for Alberta public school boards. While we acknowledge our shared responsibility to reduce emissions and lower our carbon footprints, this tax has placed a substantial strain on the budgets, removing necessary dollars out of the classrooms, and is essentially an unnecessary tax on tax. There are tens of millions of dollars each year that cannot be used for the education of our students in Alberta alone, never mind the hundreds of millions each year across Canada. We request consideration for an exemption to organizations that operate on tax dollars, or, at the very least, a carbon tax rebate similar to what is provided for private residences and small businesses. This would enhance our ability to invest in environmentally sustainable infrastructure and initiatives. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Look forward to your response. It's signed off sincerely, Dennis McNeil, the President. and he has copied all Alberta members of Parliament, the Minister of Education, the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Education, the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, the Public School Boards Association of Alberta members, as well as Troy Tate, the Executive Director and CEO of the Public School Boards Association of Alberta. Literally in the letter, to the point that Mr. Olkuri made about this non-existent federal school food program that has fed exactly 0 kids. Here you have an example from the Alberta School Boards Association telling the Government of Canada, telling the Liberals, telling the Environment Minister that he is costing them millions of dollars in operating funds that could be used to educate children, that could go to school food programs, that instead is going to pay the carbon tax, literally on paper. This is August 8th, 2024. It's not an old letter. It's a very recent letter sent over the summer as the school boards were required to do their budget. When even the school boards are saying you're wrong and that you should have a carbon tax election, then you should just listen to the school boards. You should actually do what they're telling you to do. And the fact there are Liberal MPs on this distribution list that have gotten this, and there's been no action whatsoever that I have seen whatsoever offering them any type of relief, which means that there are schools in Alberta, those that do have school food programs, that may be shutting them down because they can't afford them because of the high cost of the carbon tax. And not just my province, I'm sure there's other provinces where the high cost of the carbon tax that keeps going up, $15 a carbon ton every single April 1st, where they're going to be shutting down programs, removing after-school activities, shutting down school food programs and school food lunches because of your carbon tax. And so what I said, that people are fed up with it and they want a carbon tax election, which is why the sub-amendment is so timely to a hyper-partisan motion. That's why. That's why. When I get letters like this from school boards, which is not the, I would say it's not the typical group that would reach out to conservative members of parliament or any parliamentarians usually, because education is a provincial area of jurisdiction. Right there in the middle of the letter says there are tens of millions of dollars each year that can't be used for education of our students. Tens of millions of dollars. And I'll note, Mr. McDonald, you are one of those brave Liberal MPs who one time voted against the carbon tax in the chamber. And boy, howdy, people back home really like that too. And I want to give you that chance. I know you're not intending to stay with us for another round, and maybe you'll be another MHA provincially in Newfoundland, Labrador. But hope you'll remember that too, that the carbon tax hurts our people back home for no gain whatsoever. And the school boards in my province have made it perfectly clear where they stand on a carbon tax election, and that is taking money out of schools directly for no benefit whatsoever. They recognize they have a shared responsibility to reducing their carbon emissions, and schools are doing it. This is the public school boards all across my province who are officially now asking for relief, because they call it, and they rightly call it too. I note that President Dennis McNeil rightly calls it exactly what it is, a tax on tax. Doesn't call it an environmental plan, doesn't say that there's some type of benefit to the environment or will directly address climate change. He says in his letter it's a tax on tax. That's effectively what it is. And it's a tax on a school board and all the schools that have property, that have a building, so they operate year-round. They have heating costs, they have electricity costs. Some of them have shops, like many of the ones in my riding will have a shop class being provided where there are extra costs being imposed on them because of the carbon tax that your government insists on imposing on everyone and punishing them, which is why now there are so many people calling for a carbon tax election. I had the opportunity while we were away back in our ridings, again, meeting with our constituents like I was on the weekend. I got to do the Calgary Food Drive, which is organized by the Church of Latter-day Saints. That is about 500,000 pounds of food that is collected just in one day. They shared with me the true intense cost of the carbon tax on food and how many families they're sharing. And the president of the stake informed me there are close to 200 families now that rely on the church to help them just to make ends meet, because food has gotten so expensive because of the carbon tax. Like that the fact that inflation has come back to something stable doesn't undo all the inflation and food costs that have been imposed over the last 3 to 4 years. That's an accumulation. People haven't seen an increase of 20% in their salaries. Their wages haven't gone up 20%, but the cost of food in many cases has gone up that high. So I want to make that point that, while I was back home in my riding in Calgary, I heard it directly at the doors as I was picking up the food out of vehicles and putting them to the bins for the Calgary food drive, that people are really hurting out there. And a carbon tax election is not an inconvenience for Canadians in my riding. For the residents, it's not an inconvenience for them. They want to make it happen. So that's why the sub-amendment is so critically important. So I wanted to go, and again, I was quoting a few provincial politicians about the need for a carbon tax election. And I've gone through the effort of going through some more articles. I can offer you up some more quotes that agree with the sub-amendment, that we do nothing until that carbon tax election is called, particularly on this subject. Again, like I had mentioned before, I had quoted Sarah Hoffman, who had announced her bid for the leadership of the NDP. That's now resolved back in February 11, 2024. And on that day, this is like way before today, even back then, she said that a carbon levy is dead. When talked about the federal carbon tax, she was quoted as saying, is dead. And that was in quotation marks right in the headline. And then here you have one of those direct quotes. I think the consumer carbon tax is dead. It died provincially in the last election. The feds took it over. It uses the prime minister's name. The prime minister played dirty politics with it and picked winners and losers. If you don't have public support, you can't carry on with something like that. She goes on, and then it quotes a few other provincial members of the New Democratic Party. Like I had mentioned before, Raki Pancholi, a two-term legislature member, who was also saying that the carbon tax is among the most pressing issues for Albertans. At the time, she was still running for leadership as well before she dropped out. And I want to quote this one because it's from a former provincial cabinet minister for the New Democratic Party. And she said, and this is Ganley, she said, a Calgary legislature member and the first to put her name in the leadership race on Monday wouldn't address carbon pricing directly when asked about it. She then said, we'll have a lot of policies to release and a lot of things to say, but what I think is I am in favor of policies that result in decarbonization. She said, my preference is to do that in a way that creates the most possible economic growth for the province. There's a lot of ways to achieve that goal, which if you read between the lines, she's basically saying the federal carbon tax makes no sense. And even during the NDP's provincial leadership campaign, they talked about it as if it was an electoral issue that required an election, which is why I have this sub-amendment at the committee that puts a condition on when we would consider the main motion, which I have thoughts on the main motion, Chair, but I'll save that to the moment that we get to it. I also wanted to give you an opportunity, Chair. I am also going to put a notice of motion verbally because it's about the Immigration Refugee Board. I have it written down. I don't want to worry the clerk. I have it written down. I'll give it to him afterwards so he can take a look at it. But I want to continue with my NDP references I want to make. Don Braid, which is a very well-known journalist in Calgary, Edmonton actually, very well respected. He's written for the Herald Edmonton Journal. This is the headline: Braid, an NDP leadership candidate's startling opener, axed the carbon tax. That is not my leader speaking. That is the headline for an NDP member of the Legislative Assembly, a two-termer, starting with axe the carbon tax, which implies that there would be an election and they would run on axing the carbon tax as well. That was her opener, and this is the way it reads right at the beginning. Raki Pancholi doesn't enter the leadership race with a routine splash. Her opener is more like a cannonball from the high tower. The Edmonton MLA says it's time to dump the consumer carbon tax. Don Braid goes on to say, you are not hallucinating. She said what no NDP caucus member has said publicly before. And I agree. I remember when she made these comments, it was the talk of the town. We were all thinking that perhaps the New Democrats provincially had seen the light, and there was definitely something going on that they had realized while door knocking, while talking to the residents, that they were very upset at all levels of government, that they were imposing high costs, impossible costs to meet. When the price of food is going up by double-digit percentage points and you're seeing milk, which is $8, $9, when you're seeing meat is expensive, fruit, vegetables are expensive, you're really seeing the effects of the carbon tax directly for you. In the article, Don Braid offers the following quotes. I've been having many conversations with leading climate activists in our province, experts in this area. We need to continue those conversations to say, what would that climate plan look like without a consumer carbon price? Which, again, she's saying we need to move beyond the carbon tax, that it simply makes no sense and it isn't worth continuing. I have another one here from Mr. McDonald's province now, because I wanted to quote all parties in this debate. So this is one here. Stung by by-elections loss, Furey has strong words for the Prime Minister and carbon tax. Premier says the Prime Minister has tried to bait me with name-calling. That seems awfully familiar. In fact, as I remember it, during question period today about name-calling, our Bloc colleague was reminding the Minister of Immigration that he name-calls and baits people into having a back and forth that's not about policy, but it's about personalities. Now, Premier Furey says the Prime Minister has tried, and this is the clip, has tried to bait Furey with name-calling over carbon tax views, the Premier says. And it goes on to explain that despite the by-election loss that they experienced in their province, that the carbon tax is the primary issue. And he says here, on the carbon tax in particular, the Prime Minister has tried to bait me at times with certain ad hominems and name-calling almost. But look, we have a very different opinion of the carbon tax. It's not right for the people of the province right now, he said. I wish the Prime Minister would understand that. He's being very sclerotic in his approach on this ideologic marriage that he has to this principle. That's not to say that we don't believe in fighting climate change. We certainly do, but this policy is wrong. Hence, the need for my sub-amendment to wait until we can have a carbon tax election so the public can decide whether this government deserves to stay or whether there's a new group of people who will earn the right to govern and do right by the public. When even, I think, Premier Furey might be the last Liberal Premier in this country. I'm not quite sure if he might be the last one. You're saying, yes, Mr. McDonald, leave it to the islanders on the rock to have the last Liberal government. Maybe that'll change in the next provincial election for the MHAs, and there'll be a new one. But it's the last provincial government left standing. That's unusual. I don't even think there's a Liberal Party of Alberta left anymore in my home province. So I wanted to draw attention to that. I did say I had a notice of motion to give. I wanted to do it verbally because I wanted to make sure that
we should focus on this one. That's my understanding is.
Yes, that's why I'm getting a verbal notice of motion. I'm not going to be debating it. But I wanted to make sure that the Immigration Refugee Board and their chair is aware that she's violated the law. So I'm just going to give notice of motion. I'll continue the debate on my sub-amendment. This is my motion, that the committee, pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, order the production of all documents and records to all members of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration related to access to information and privacy, ATIPS, requests A-2022-02100, comma, A-2022-02101, comma, A-2022-02102, comma, it's almost over, A-2022-02103, comma, and A-2022-02104.
Point of, Monsieur le Président, est-ce que, juste pour faciliter...
Point of order, Chair, just to make the life and work of our interpreters easier, if we can provide them with the document that our colleague is reading from. I'm almost finished, or maybe you can go a bit slower for the interpreters. Thank you for the reminder. I will go slower for the sake of our interpreters. Apologies.
Sorry, Flor, I will give it to Kaibaga.
I just called for a point of clarification. Is he moving a motion or just putting it on notice? And he's allowed to do that, Clerk?
He's just giving a notice of motion. There will be no debate, and he's not moving it.
I'll pause so I can continue here. So, submitted to the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada concerning the January 2019 policy entitled Claims That Can Be Accepted Without a Hearing, in parentheses, the January 2019 policy, which have exceeded statutory deadlines since February 2023.
Point d'ordre, là, j'ai pas de traduction.
Point of order, Chair, I don't have the interpretation.
Sorry,
take that
Mr.
motion?
Mitch, give
So-
us a few seconds. Okay, please carry on.
So I'll continue here, which have exceeded statutory deadlines since February 2023 by over 20 months, including but not limited to all records related to the development, approvals process, and implementation of the January 2019 policy, and any amendments made to it as referenced in ATIP A-2022-02100. New section, the list of countries and subnational groups eligible for claims under the January 2019 policy, as well as any amendments to this list, all legal or policy-making authorities behind the publication of the list, and any records showing the process by which these countries and groups were added or removed from the list, as referenced in ATIP A-2022-02101. All communications between the IRB and other government departments, agencies, ministerial offices, or the Prime Minister's office, as well as third-party stakeholders regarding the development, finalization, and implementation of the January 2019 policy, as referenced in ATIP A-2022-02102. Any records related to pilot projects undertaken prior to the announcement of the January 2019 policy that identified specific countries or subnational groups, including records about each pilot project, funding allocations, and the roles of officials involved in the projects, as referenced in ATIP A-2022-02103. Aggregate data regarding claims processed under the January 2019 policy, including positive versus negative determinations, the number of claims versus the total number of persons, and records pertaining to how claims were grouped outside the regular processing order, as referenced in ATIP A-2022-02104, and that these documents be produced within 30 days.
Thank you.
I've also included all the original text of the language, so the references are in the back, and I'm happy to give it to the clerk so that he has the information. I thank the interpreters. I regret speaking a little bit too fast and technically there, and that's my notice of motion, Chair. My next article that I found on City News was, again, was referencing the Premier of my province, this is the headline, that urges feds to scrap inhumane carbon tax hike at House Committee. And that this is the reference of the committee appearance that my Premier, when she was here in Ottawa, made around the April 1st announcement that the carbon tax again was going to go up $15 a carbon ton. This is what she said. These are direct quotes. "This isn't just reckless, it's immoral and inhuman," she said. "I'm here on behalf of Albertans and Canadians who are struggling with severe financial pressures." She went on to say, "The solutions for the federal government is to increase the carbon tax on something that is life or death for Albertans in the extreme cold of winter." And then she went on to remind the federal government that policies like these should be applied equally across all of Canada, and that when you create special exemptions for only one part of the country because they happen to use heating oil as opposed to using clean burning natural gas like they do back home in Calgary and Edmonton and all the smaller towns, that it creates an unequal treatment of Canadians in Confederation, and it's unfair. And if committee members want to go, they can go to the transcript of her appearance where she raised many points like this during her time there. The other one I wanted to reference as well was an article, and again, this backs up the need for my sub-amendment because it's not just me saying it, it's premiers saying it publicly, it's the public through their provincial officials saying that they basically want carbon tax election. They're all recognizing that it's a primary issue that's driving a lot of the commentary and the emails and the contacts, direct messages we get, and that people want to see a carbon tax election sooner than later. I'll remind all of us here that we're probably going to have a vote on that this Wednesday, and I hope that all opposition parties will join and vote yes to having that carbon tax election. The next article I have here is BC to scrap carbon tax if Ottawa drops its alternate tax. That's Premier David Eby. What he means by the alternate tax is the federal backstop that is stopping any province from attempting to remove its consumer carbon tax by backstopping through legislation in the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, the GGPP Act, that basically prevents them from not having one. It forces it on every single province. David Eby is quoted in the article, and these are some of the quotes I have here, as Premier British Columbia. A lot of British Columbians are struggling with affordability, Eby said. The political consensus we had in BC has been badly damaged by the approach of the federal government. So if it decides to remove the legal backstop requiring us to have a consumer carbon tax in BC, we will end the consumer carbon tax in BC, he said at an event in Vancouver alongside his wife, Kaylee Lynch, and Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew. And I wanted to also quote the Premier of Manitoba, who's also quoted in this article but further down. And Premier Kinew said Thursday that he is in alignment with the Premier Eby on the issue, having asked Ottawa for an exemption from carbon pricing in the spring. He believes the tax is not the right way to fight climate change at a time when high inflation and high interest rates are making life unaffordable for many. Here's a direct quote. I'm worried that the politicization of this issue is causing us to lose a generation of Canadians, causing us to lose so many people from the blue collar, and we can't afford that. That's a direct quote. And it goes on and on and on like that, that there are concerns by premiers of our great country who are not of the same political affiliation that I am, who are saying the same things, which is the carbon tax is either wrong, immoral, inhuman, or that we need a carbon tax election, or that it has an electoral impact, which is why I have this sub-amendment before the committee, that no action be taken until there's that carbon tax election. And that's what we could report back to the House on the matter. I think for now, I'm going to stop my commentary there, but I have more material. I have my binder with me all the time, and I'm happy to read more into the record from my residents in my riding and my constituents that have honored me by sending me here to represent their views. And I'm going to continue doing that, but I think for now that's enough, having provided, chaired the public school board's very important feedback, because that I think what President McNeil had said is incredibly important for the consideration of the sub-amendment, because it comes from school boards with our high cost, tens of millions of dollars being imposed on schools in Alberta. That is literally taking money away from educating students for a tax on tax. That is his words, not mine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kimmich. We will go to Mr. El Khoury and then Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to my colleague, Mr. Kimmich, first of all, Mr. Chair, all world know that climate change is a serious problem. All humanity facing this problem. If we don't stand bravely and face this problem and bring the adequate solution to it, it means we are not preparing this country neither for us, nor for our children, nor for the children of our children for generation to come. We would like to prepare Canada for our children's and other generations for a cleaner air, cleaner drinking water, when no flood, no forest fire, no tornado, no hurricane. This is the way and the only way we could fight a climate change. Besides that, Mr. Chair, we all know that the federal government gives every province in Canada a big amount of money collecting from carbon tax to go to the pocket of citizens. That's number one. Number two, my colleague, Mr. Kimmich, last time said, when I said Conservative vote against the food program to the student at schools. And he said that may jeopardize many business and will be obliged to close their business because of that. I wouldn't be surprised, Mr. Chair, because the policy of Conservative is to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And that's exactly what we are hearing and what we are experiencing at the moment over here. I will be surprised how come a party pretend that he is working for the citizen of Canada vote against this program when this program 9 of 10 family the parents could go to work without having trouble in thinking about children. And how about those parent who cannot pay the fees for a private daycare? So this, for me, there is no explanation. There is no way to understand that behavior from a political party pretend he is looking for the interests of Canada. I will end up here for this, but I have many comments to say, Mr. Speaker. I believe this is clear from my side. Thank you.
Mr. Al-Khoury, we have Mr. McLean on the list, next speaker, but Mr. Arnold is filling in for him. So, Mr. Arnold, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's an honor to be here with this committee, and it's interesting to see Mr. McDonald. We sat on the same committee for 9 years now, and on the same committee, we don't very often see each other in other committees, so it's a pleasure to be here with him. Mr. Chair, I'm here to speak to Mr. Kimmich's sub-amendment that this bill not be dealt with until a carbon tax election is held, so that Canadians can vote out this out-of-time NDP Liberal coalition government. Mr. Chair, I want to thank Mr. Kimmich for his quotes he provided from across party lines and across the country. Some of what he provided was about British Columbia. Being from British Columbia, from the North Okanagan Shuswap, BC was one of the first provinces to implement a carbon tax. The BC Liberal government did that a number of years ago. Now that BC Liberal government has had to change their party name because they no longer wanted to be affiliated with the federal Liberal government. And just a short weeks ago, the leader of that party, Mr. Kevin Falcon, was noted as saying he's not going to leave BC in a disadvantaged position when he announced that that party would scrap the carbon tax should they become elected. Since that point in time, he's pulled their party out of the election for reasons only he knows, but the debate has now in BC become very interesting because Mr. David Eby, the Premier of BC, had called our leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, had called him out and called him, saying that he was basically working from a baloney factory when he talked about the carbon tax. Well, now there's been a flip-flop. And I would note that the BC NDP party is famous for flip-flops in election cycles. And Mr. Eby has stated that he would end the BC carbon tax if the federal backstop was removed. That's an incredible flip-flop from a party that has supported carbon pricing for a long time. I will give him credit for listening to Canadians and to British Columbians that have spoken up. I've heard them all through the summer speaking about how fed up they are with the carbon tax and how it increases the cost of everything. And it's just becoming more and more frequently exposed that the Liberal NDP carbon tax is impacting Canadians and the Canadian economy in devastating ways, and more Canadians are pushing back against it. This government has had to find ways of carving out carbon tax exemptions for certain Canadians in order to protect their votes. We've seen the carve-out deals for home heating that started in Atlantic Canada when the Prime Minister's Atlantic caucus revolted and demanded a carve-out, and then it had to be extended elsewhere to avoid discrimination by region over the carbon tax carve-outs. Further, provincial premiers, as I mentioned, David Eby and more, have opposed the Prime Minister's plans to tax Canadians into submission. The latest being David Eby, as I mentioned, Premier David Eby, and it's happening across the country. Mr. Kimmich also mentioned Premier Fury in Newfoundland. That's across the country from coast to coast. Even our northern territories are being punished by the carbon tax. This announcement by Premier Eby was only days before calling the BC provincial election. So many British Columbians, and being from there, I'm hearing it, many British Columbians are asking questions like, is this simply an election ploy similar to the NDP, federal NDP leader's by-election announcement that he was tearing up the supply agreement with the Liberals? Yes, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Arnold, you're welcome to say anything, but I'm in out of court, see, because if provincial government is not here to defend there, so instead of just focusing on this, I think it's wise not to focus on the BC election through this committee. That's what my feelings, and I will let you continue with speaking.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, but I believe what is taking place in the BC election is very relevant to this debate today, because we're seeing how British Columbia has now shifted away from supporting the carbon tax. And that is what this sub-amendment is about. The leader of the federal NDP, prior to that by-election, stated that the Liberals have let people down, and the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interest to fight for the people. Then, immediately after the by-election in Winnipeg, that leader had another change of heart and announced he's going to continue to support the out-of-time Prime Minister, potentially just long enough to secure his own pension. Mr. Chair, the carbon tax increases the cost of everything for everyone. Over the summer, I met with and heard from the good people of the Okanagan, the Shuswap, and across BC. They are hardworking and they love their country. But what I heard them say was that taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and they are saying that time is up. At a grand opening of a larger premises for a local food bank, we heard that 1 in 5 Canadians skipped or reduced the size of at least one meal because they can't afford groceries. 1 in 5 parents ate less so that their children or other family members could eat. In Vernon, where this announcement took place, 1 in 23 families relied on the food bank in the last 12 months, and 1 in 13 kids in Vernon depended on the food bank last year. 30% of food bank users in Vernon are children. Many of those food bank users are hardworking middle-class families struggling to put food on the table, some already working 2 or more jobs. After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, those people have no confidence in this government, and they want to see a carbon tax election. I also heard from business owners over the summer, one of whom showed me his carbon tax bills. His farm operation paid $100,000 in carbon tax in 2023. Carbon tax alone, $100,000. All of that cost had to be passed on to the consumer or the taxpayer, who pays the carbon tax accumulated on every food item they buy. That farmer told me that under the current regime, it was not worth running his full operation, so he laid off 55 employees and set $30 million worth of equipment into idle mode because he can't operate effectively and economically under the current carbon tax regime. Thus, by shutting down that food supply chain, he probably drove up consumer costs, adding to the overall debt because of unemployment, employment insurance costs, and borrowing. Mr. Chair, it's cases like this that I've heard, and cases of seniors who received an announcement that their pension checks would be increasing, only to find out their GIS supplement payments would be decreased by a larger amount, leaving them with less to buy groceries, get to medical appointments, or heat their homes. Many of those who called were in tears because they didn't know if they were going to be forced out onto the streets because of the increased carbon tax costs and rising costs of basic living. I hear from assistance workers who are having to they're having to seek mental health guidance because they've heard so many of these difficult to hear cases of seniors not being able to survive because of increased costs. Mr. Chair, I could go on much more because of what's happened in British Columbia. You urged me not to bring the BC election into this, but because it's a time of a BC election and it has become a very much a carbon tax election in British Columbia, as we've seen leader after leader after leader speak out against the carbon tax. Canadians have had enough of the carbon tax, and they want to get to a carbon tax election now. So I would encourage all members of this committee to grasp the severity of the situation for Canadians and give them a chance immediately to participate in a carbon tax election. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We will go to Mr. Maguire. My dear friend Larry, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to Mr. Kimitch's amendment here as well on this particular topic that has come before us, brought by the Liberals in the discussion, and I think it's very, very relevant that we move towards a carbon tax election, and I have some thoughts on that that I wish to share with the committee at this time as well. You know, Mr. Kimitch's sub-amendment says that that after the temporary foreign workers, we should add the following words, quote, after a carbon tax election is held so that Canadians and Quebecois can vote out this tired, out-of-time NDP Liberal coalition government, end quote. And Mr. Speaker, there's been lots of relevant comments made by my colleagues here today already, but I find it unfortunate that that this coalition, which was existing for the last couple of 2.5 years or more, has found, well, it's a bit encouraging that they decided that they wouldn't have that. Maybe the NDP walked away from that. But in every day since then, it's very obvious that that coalition is still alive and well. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to, or Mr. Chair, I should say, I just want to thank you for the discussion that we're able to have here in the chamber today in this committee, and I appreciate that opportunity to discuss the sub-amendment before us, which typically or specifically adds the lines as I've said. The fact of the matter is Canadians should be given that opportunity to decide whether or not they still have faith in the Liberals and the NDP after their disastrous coalition and failed positions and policies, which have left many individuals and families, young couples, workers, seniors, and so on, struggling to make ends meet. Even some of the words that the Liberal Liberals put forward in this motion, by themselves, they alerted the concerns of many different sectors. But they haven't done anything to really meet the struggles of the people that are having trouble making ends meet. I had a flat tire the other day, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Chair, and I actually had the opportunity of getting in a cab to go back to get my car when they've got it fixed. And the fellow had given me a ride in Brandon. It's not that big a city, but he recognized me and said, "You're Mr. Maguire, Member of Parliament." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I just want you to take the message back that I've been here for 12 years in Canada. There was lots of jobs and good paying jobs when I was there, but I'm having a struggle to find a job now other than driving this cab. And I know many of my colleagues that have come from other parts of the world are having that trouble now as well." And he said it's a struggle to make ends meet. And I couldn't believe what came out of his mouth next. He said, you know, my rent's gone up, my cost of food's gone up, and I'm having a struggle to make ends meet for my family. This is a prime example, Mr. Chair, I believe, of what's happening across Canada, and that's why we've been so insistent as a Conservative Party in calling for a carbon tax election. To leave the money in people's pockets to start with, rather than taking it out of their pockets and trying to redistribute it. And I'll get into that more in my discussion here in some time. But, you know, poll after poll, as I've been referring to it, make it very clear that Canadians demand change. This gentleman that I was speaking to, that I was writing with the other day, is one of those. You know, 62% rule, I guess, is what I was going to say there. One of the things that I learned very early in my political career was that from pollsters and others is that when 62% of any particular group of Canadians, in the case is when I was a provincial MLA, if 62% of those people don't like your leader, you're not going to win the election. Well, we're well ahead of that in regards to where we're at with just the Liberals alone. And if you put them together with the NDP, well, you know, we're well over 75 to 80%. And I think it's, my colleagues just reminded me here that it was Mr. Trudeau alone that decided to call an early election in 2021, right in the middle of COVID. It was very unnecessary to call at that time. And it's Canadians' turns to have the election that they want and allow them to call it at this time. And so I've had my ear to the ground, the same as my colleague to my left and my colleagues to the right here. You, Mr. Chair, as well, and Vice Chair, and I think it's incumbent upon the government of the day to pay specific attention to these Canadians. Those were the best economic times when that happened in Manitoba. The government of the day in Manitoba had 10 of the best years of economic activity ever in the province. And they did go on the NDP to win that election. But this isn't the case here now. We've got the biggest debt that we've ever had in this country, and the case is being made by individuals that they cannot be taxed anymore in this country. They know that the overspending and during COVID, and I only use that word because the part of it's backed up by the parliamentary budget officer that said that 40% of the $500 billion that they spent to adjust to the COVID crisis had nothing to do with COVID. So that's why I refer to that. And so after 9 years of the Prime Minister, taxes are up, the costs are up, crime is up. And, you know, I mean, it's easy to say that time is up too, because time is up for these Canadians. They just can't make ends meet. I mean, I've said taxes are up because we've got the biggest debt. Costs are up because of the inflationary spending of the government. Crime is up because they're too soft on things like bail, where the record amount of people let on bail, there's been a record amount of murders by people let out on bail in Canada, 256, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, which is up over 100 in the last 4 years alone. These are things that Canadians see every day in their lives, and they're to be blunt, they're sick and tired of it. There's really a lot of reasons why the Prime Minister should be listening to Canadians, and why the opposition parties, other than ourselves who have been listening, should be calling for this carbon tax election as well. It's a tired, out-of-touch NDP Liberal coalition government, and they must give the people a chance to vote to show Canadians there's whose interests they're saying they're trying to defend. So over 9 long years, this coalition under the Prime Minister has imposed policies that have made life unaffordable for Canadians. I'm not talking just about things like Bill C-69, Mr. Chair, now, but there's many others as well that I've referred to in the areas of crime and costs. They promised that the carbon tax would somehow make us richer, but instead it's contributed to the rising costs of every Canadian family. It's become more difficult, not less, for folks to feed their families, heat their homes, and drive to work. even get their kids to things, events, and school. So, Mr. Chair, it is time for Canadians to be heard. I'm saying that the numbers tell a story. The reality of the carbon tax is that it's a financial burden on working Canadians. According to the Fraser Institute, by 2030, the first carbon tax will cost the average worker $6,700. That's only 6 years away, Mr. Chair. Today, the premiers are rebelling, as my colleague has referred to. My colleague who was here has referred to from British Columbia. The same thing's happening with the election that's been called in New Brunswick. I know the same thing in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and other provinces. The premiers have all indicated that they are concerned that the carbon tax has helped increase this cost of living. So, Mr. Chair, it's definitely important that the government pay attention. But now, instead of doing anything about that, they've caused a second carbon tax, and it's set to cost our economy another $9 billion by that same year, 2030. That's billions of dollars drained from our economy. More importantly, Mr. Chair, it's 164,000 jobs are projected to be lost. This is the last thing hardworking Canadians need during a cost of living crisis, to be losing their jobs. But that's what's happening across the country. This tax isn't just about abstract numbers, Mr. Chair. It's affecting all of us every single day. The Canadian Trucking Alliance tells us that by 2030, trucking costs will rise by $4 billion due to the carbon tax. That's atrocious. That's money that truckers can't absorb, which means higher prices for all the goods they transport. Everything from food to clothing and essentials. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, rather, this is paid for by Canadians, nearly 50% of whom, according to studies, show that they are within $200 of insolvency at the end of every paycheck. Now, who could be heartless enough to not pay attention to what's going on with those kinds of numbers? We dealt with it during COVID, but it wasn't dealt with well. As I've previously explained, 40% of the money was wasted. We don't know where it went. And I'm only quoting the parliamentary budget officer. So if he doesn't know where it went, how should we? Is it right that Canadian families are now paying $700 more for food? This is something that the taxi driver in Brandon mentioned to me the other day, this year, and every year to follow. That's $700 more than last year, Mr. Chair. And this is a considerable increase in the ability to not only feed our families, but make sure that their family members, their kids, are able to not go to school hungry and make sure that they can have the best opportunity to learn that we possibly can. So I want to ask, is it right that millions of people are lining up outside food banks, relying on them to survive? And I've raised the particular case that we have in Brandon many times in the House of Commons over the last while, and I know it's happening across Canada. But tragically, people across the country are finding themselves in this situation, including many, as I mentioned, in my riding of Brandon and Brandon Souris. This is an excerpt from an article published on Discover Westman earlier this year. And I quote, Mr. Chair, Samaritan House Ministries saw an alarming increase in the number of food hampers they gave out last year. They go on to say that the downtown Brandon Food Bank averages 24,000 food hampers in any given year. The pandemic created fluctuations in those numbers. However, in 2022, they were back to their normal average of 24,000 hampers in 2022. What's astonishing is in 2023, Samaritan House saw an astounding increase of just under 12,000 hampers. And this was just from their own food bank. Food banks across the country have seen this trend, and it's not slowing down anytime soon. 2023, it goes on to say, was an amazing year in lots of ways, but also startling, shares Executive Director Barbara McNish. We had 1,052 new people use the food bank last year who have never used it before and were returning after years of not using it. or we're returning after a user not using it, she says. So before 2019, we were serving about 24,000 hampers in a year, and then, of course, COVID hit, and we were down. And then the province helped with the nutrition, so our numbers went up if we include the hampers dealing with nutrition. So that went anywhere from 25,000 to 28,000 if you include the nutrition hampers. In 2022, it went back down to 24,000, which would be our normal. States McNish. Last year was 2023. For 2023, we served 35,967 hampers to people. This was a great increase, and that's alarming. She closes by saying, and when you see the staggering numbers that are coming, new or renewed, plus those who are already existing, she adds, you can see that people are in need. End of that article, Mr. Chair. This isn't the Canada we believe in, but the carbon taxes contributed to these troubling trends. We've got a couple more things here, Mr. Chair, and then I'll let my colleague have the floor. Meanwhile, the Liberal government continues to insist that this tax is the solution, despite all evidence to the contrary. The tax does nothing for the environment while punishing families, workers, and small businesses. It's merely a tax grab disguised as environmental policy. Yes, this measure has been supported by the NDP in Parliament dozens of times, even as 80% of Canadians are worse off due to the current system. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has stated that most families pay more in carbon tax than they receive in rebates. This year alone, Manitoba families, those born in the prairies and those who chose our province as their new home, will face an additional $1,750 in cost due to the carbon tax. On top of that, Canadian taxpayers will also be paying an extra $486 million in GST as a result of it. This has placed an unnecessary financial burden on families and businesses, all while failing to deliver the promised environmental benefits. In fact, Canada's ranking in the Climate Change Performance Index recently fell to 62nd out of 67 countries, highlighting the ineffectiveness of this policy. There's lots more I could say, Mr. Chair, but I'll leave it at that for now and pass the floor to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Maguire. Mr. McLean, you were not here earlier, but someone was infilling for you, Mr. Arnold, so we gave you a spot to him and we put you back on the list. And now Mr. Radikop is on the list, but Mr. Hullen is infilling for him. So Mr. Hullen's spot is yours. You on the list, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to be back.
Welcome. You're here. Okay, hold on one second. The speaking order is this. Mr. Radikop, which Mr. Hullen will take the spot, then Mr. Kamich, then Madam Kaibaga, and then MP McLean. Thank you, Mr. Hullen. Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to be back on the committee after a while. A lot has changed in this committee, but I guess the only thing that hasn't changed is the Liberal NDP Costly Coalition is still together. I find it quite shameful that I'll start off my remarks. Actually, since Ms. Kwan wants to speak up, I guess we'll start with the original motion of C-71. I'll just say it's quite shameful that we had a common sense conservative bill S-245 in front of us. That was a very common sense conservative bill that should have given lost Canadian citizenship. It was a very straightforward bill.
One person at a time, please.
And
thank you.
It's shameful
Honourable
that
members, you know that because it's hard for interpreters and other technical staff, if you want the floor, please raise your hand and I will be happy to give you the floor. So the floor is only with Mr. Hullen, and Mr. Hullen should be the only one that is making remarks at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was saying I find it quite shameful that Ms. Kwan, who also came here as an immigrant like myself, would hold hostage a bill in Bill S-245 that could have given lost Canadian citizenship immediately. But once again, she teamed up with the corrupt Liberal government and completely lost hope for all the lost Canadians that were looking forward to that bill. I had many people reach out to me about that. Much like this Liberal NDP government has held hostage an election that Canadians desperately want, a carbon tax election at that. You know, when I look around the room, even on the Liberal side, and Chair yourself, we all came here as immigrants, and our great immigration shadow minister, the greatest shadow immigration minister that the Conservative Party has had, in my opinion. We all came here as immigrants. We had the chance to work hard, play by the rules, and become citizens. And now we get to have the honor and responsibility of sitting here in Parliament. But I find it very shameful that Ms. Kwan would take that away from those lost Canadians. She took that hope away.
Yeah, keep it coming, man.
Oh, I will. But now, like I said, now they've held hostage this Parliament and an election, a carbon tax election, away from Canadians that they desperately want. This carbon tax scam was sold by this Liberal NDP government as lies that are clear to see now more than ever. First, they lied and said that this carbon tax scam somehow would fix the environment, that all the floods and all the fires would somehow miraculously be fixed. We know that's not true. And it's not just us saying it, it's the government's own department that says they don't measure the carbon tax scam, what it does compared to emissions, because they know it's like the Prime Minister, it's not worth the cost. There's nothing that directly says by raising the carbon tax scam, somehow the environment will get fixed. That was lie number one that they sold about the carbon tax scam. Proven wrong once again. The second lie was how somehow Canadians are supposed to get back more than what they pay into the scam. Again, that was proven wrong over and over and over again by the government's own parliamentary budgeting officer. I had the chance to question him as well. He said it on multiple occasions, that when you factor in the fiscal and economic impact of the carbon tax, most households are at a net loss, and that goes for all the provinces where this applies. So that was lie number two that was proven wrong. And now this costly Liberal NDP coalition wants to quadruple the carbon tax scam. They want to make the already expensive gas, groceries, and home heating more expensive by quadrupling the scam. They already know that 2 million Canadians are going into a food bank in a single month because of their failed policies. They know another million are going there this year. They know that families are going to pay another $700 in the cost of groceries this year. They know all of this. They know they've doubled the housing costs with the failed policies. But again, because of their radical ideology, they refuse to listen to the 70%, a majority of Canadians that said, do not raise the carbon tax scam. They refuse to listen to them. It's because of their radical ideology. And why is Ms. Kwan and the NDP doing this? Well, it's clear to see. Their leader is up for a $2.2 million pension. That's why, in fact, they voted in favor of the carbon tax scam 24 times. 24 times. All for the greed of their leader being able to get his pension. And that is why they're holding this parliament hostage now, because of this carbon tax scam. They refuse to give Canadians the election that they want and the one that they deserve, the carbon tax election. And the bill S-245, which I want to take some time to thank my brilliant Senate colleague, Senator Yona Martin, for putting in the work she did for that bill and getting it to where it was. Again, it's sad to see that this Liberal NDP government totally let down the lost Canadians that had hope in that. But when we talk about newcomers, after 9 years of this government, newcomers are one of the most hit with the failed economic policies of this costly coalition. As I said before, we all came, most of us here that are sitting on this committee as members, we came here as immigrants. But why did we come here? There was something before Justin Trudeau that was called the Canadian Dream. That dream meant you were able to work hard, put in effort, you would be able to afford a home, afford groceries, and live in safe communities. But because of wacko and radical policies by this costly coalition, none of that is true anymore. So much so that a lot of newcomers question, why did we come here? What was the point of moving here? We left everything behind, and we were promised that we would be able to have an affordable home, groceries, and safe communities, but when they get here, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare because this government has doubled housing costs. They gave Canadians 40-year highs in inflation because of their out-of-control spending. That gave Canadians also the most rapid interest rate hikes in Canadian history. Violent crime, auto theft, extortions, everything is on the rise. And now, even small businesses that are the backbone of our economy, there's more insolvencies. There's less and less people that want to invest in Canada because Canada is not somewhere where you can succeed anymore under this government. It's clear to see in the numbers. I think there was a number last year, around 400,000 people left Canada. They left Canada. It's incredible. And some of the top reasons why people are leaving Canada, number one, the cost of living. And number two is because their credentials don't get recognized. And I'll put in a plug for a common sense conservative promise that we're going to put forward after we have a common sense conservative government under our leader, is the National Blue Seal program, which will ensure our brilliant immigrants, that includes the 20,000 doctors and 30,000 nurses that live in Canada today that aren't licensed because of this red tape and bureaucracy, that within 60 days, if they can prove their skill and take a test, they will be able to work in the field that they're supposed to work in, so that we can get more doctors and nurses into our healthcare system. And what we'll also do is make sure that we're building the homes and axing the tax, this carbon tax scam, once we do form government, so that people actually want to stay here. That we bring back that Canadian dream that we all got to realize. And it's sad this Liberal NDP costly coalition doesn't want others to see that same Canadian opportunity or Canadian dream that we got to see. So much so that we have people leaving in record numbers. And once again, it's really sad to see that all of this pain and suffering that Canadians are having to be put through is because the NDP is greedy for their leader's $2.2 million pension. That's it. That's all this is all about. Their leader put on this grand theater the 2 weeks ago where he said he ripped up the agreement. He made a big deal out of it. He wouldn't stop saying, I ripped it up, I ripped it up, I ripped it up. And we said, I don't think that that's true. And it only took a week after that where he said, nope, I taped it right back up. I used the people in Winnipeg for the by-election that I almost lost. And now I don't need those votes in Winnipeg. So now he taped up that agreement once again and says he has full confidence in the most ethically corrupt prime minister in Canadian history. The one that has doubled housing costs, the one who's let crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder run rampant in our communities. The leader of the NDP sold out and said, once again, he has full confidence in that same prime minister and that same government. And now Canadians have to suffer even more because this radical ideology isn't going anywhere, because they're promising they will inflict even more pain by quadrupling the carbon tax scam. And even this costly coalition knows how bad it is. That's why they hid a report, a secret report that their department hid that prove that around $30 billion is the hole that this carbon tax scam puts into our national GDP. They hid that report. It took a lot for the PBO to come out about that. All of this for a $2.2 million pension. Newcomers that we talk to all the time, they have lost hope. Some of them have to sleep in their cars, as we're hearing. Some of the students are living under bridges, but it wasn't their fault. It wasn't their fault at all. They were promised one thing, and when they got here, reality was something completely different from what they were promised. It's not their fault that this costly coalition opened the doors and said, come on in, and then blamed them for the housing crisis. This is what incompetence looks like. First, we had Sean Fraser, the then incompetent immigration minister, the now incompetent housing minister, and he passed the torch down to someone, in my opinion, is even more incompetent, Mark Miller, who doesn't even know his own file. And all they did was blame the same immigrants that they said could come here. They opened the door for them, then blamed them. It's like inviting someone to your house and then blaming them for eating all the food and taking up all the beds, even though you invited them. This is the reality. And that's why this Prime Minister is so unpopular today. It's clear to see. Anyone you talk to is feeling the pain of failed policies by this Liberal NDP government. And again, this sub-amendment brought forward by my brilliant colleague, Tom Kimmich, it highlights something that Canadians are asking for everywhere we go. Canadians are tired. Instead of getting approval from Canadians, this costly coalition will continue on their radical path to quadruple the carbon tax scam. I say, and we say, let's give Canadians the opportunity. Let's put it before Canadians. Let's pause the carbon tax scam, and I hope Ken will agree, because he's spoken out against it. But let's put it before Canadians. Let Canadians decide, do they want more of this costly coalition that will tax your food, your gas, and your home heating, and make it even more expensive with this carbon tax scam? Or do Canadians want a common-sense Conservative government under Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime, and bring home that Canadian dream that we all once knew, and that country that we all love and that we all once knew before? Let's put it before Canadians and call in a carbon tax election now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hallan. We have the speaking list. We have Mr. Kimmich, then Madam Kaibaga, Mr. McLean, and then Madam Kwan. So I'll give the floor to Mr. Kimmich. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It's hard to follow my colleague from Calgary Forest Lawn. And he's also the neighbor riding, and he's getting a big chunk of in the redistribution of the riding I represent currently, which is the second largest riding in Canada by population size. So I'm thankful for the extra help. I wanted to go back to comments made by Mr. El Khoury. I have some more articles I wanted to refer in the public record from independent journalists. Also, I've had the time to look up a few comments made by Liberal members of Parliament about the carbon tax. So I thought I would quote them back to the record, because I think you'll find that these comments agree with our position that the sub-amendment should pass, because these particular Liberal members of Parliament actually agree with the idea that the carbon tax is unpopular and that should be put to the public. The public will choose to throw those politicians out who still support the carbon tax. Mr. El Khoury has said that, you know, his hope was for a future with no tornadoes, no hurricanes, no wildfires, and no a bunch of other natural disasters. And he was tying it all into, like, the carbon tax. And we've had the carbon tax now for close to a decade, and we have had hurricanes, we have had wildfires. We have had all types of natural disasters. I'm just wondering at what price will all of these go away so I can go back to my constituents and tell them how punishing must it become, how ridiculous must it be, how radical must it be in order for all of those things to go away. Like, it's just a ridiculous argument. Nowhere in the IPCC report does it say such ludicrous things that you can somehow, through a carbon tax, stop nature from taking its course, stop nature from damaging what we have. And if you look at the statistics on how many human deaths have happened over the last century, they go down. The richer a country becomes, the better it can afford climate-resilient infrastructure to prevent those deaths. It's right in the IPCC report. So I just find it completely ridiculous. And then another comment that Mr. O'Clery made, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and then he accused the Conservatives, that is our plan. Well, looking around at how many liberals connected to the government have gotten richer, that's a lot. There's a lot of cronies out there who have gotten rich over the last 9 years that have been able to extract rent. That's what we call it, economic rent out of the government. And so I was busy going through some of those people who seemingly are either about to make a fortune, have made a fortune, are interested in making a fortune, and they seem to be running out of time. So if this passed, Chair, if this sub-amendment passed, I'd be worried that some of them won't get their chance to go and make their case to the government that they could perhaps extract more economic rent out of the government, that they could maybe get another $200,000 to their company. And I'm going to bring up the Sustainable Development Technology Fund, what's been now named as the slush fund, the green slush fund, that where $1 billion of taxpayer cash was misspent, over $100 million of which was corruptly spent. And I want to remind those at this table, Chair, of exactly one particular case, because it's fresh in my mind, that Annette Versherian, who was personally appointed by the minister at the time to chair, voted herself. She was the chair of this board and was at the board meeting when it voted itself over $200,000 directly to her company. That's not me saying it. That's the Auditor General. There's been investigations. There's been parliamentary inquiries into this, all related back to exactly what the sub-amendment is about. So when we're talking about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, I see a lot of liberals getting real rich real fast, and the government, the cabinet, facilitating it, making it easier, just opening themselves up to like blatant corruption in that case. And that's just one example. Now we have the latest news that that Telesat Holdings got $2.4 billion afforded to it for a program. And, when people inquired online, how much would it cost to get a different private sector option out there? It was over $1 billion less. Interesting that the heads of Telesat Holdings are good friends with Mark Carney. Oh. Mark Carney, a gentleman who is deeply connected to the Liberal Party of Canada, who is now on an economic task force, seemingly doing government policy work, but not on the government dime, which is also interesting, seeing as he's the chair of Brookfield Investment and stands to gain substantially from some of the decisions that are about to be made by the government. And I wanted to draw the attention specifically to Liberal Budget 2024, where there was open talk about having pension plans be forced to invest directly into capital projects in Canada. And I thought, especially the Canada Pension Plan, was about seeking the highest returns so that retirees who are forced to pay into it can get the return on the investment that they made because they're compelled to make that retirement saving. And the goal of the CPP should be to ensure that there are enough benefits, enough cash in the fund to pay out those hardworking retirees. And now I see there's like a $50 billion fund being put together by another liberal, someone connected directly to that political movement, someone who's on an economic task force, personally appointed by the Prime Minister, no less. But not in the Prime Minister's office, which is really interesting because I guess he won't have access to all that Finance Canada data, unless he will. And it's a $50 billion fund that was reported by Logic, which is an online publication that tracks Canadian tech news and business news. And so in here, it says that Brookfield is looking to take advantage of this 2024 Liberal budget announcement that would see the pension funds be forced to invest. It's a $50 billion fund. $36 billion would be originating from Canadian pension funds, and then $10 billion from taxpayers, and Brookfield would commit $4 billion. How generous of them. That's really
Point of order,
interesting.
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Just wondering.
Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if Mr. Comich is discussing the motion on C-71. The point he's bringing should be in a different committee, not in this committee?
Can you clarify, Mr. Chang, again?
Well, he's talking about finance and Brookfield, and those things should be in the finance committee, not in a committee of discussing the motion on C-71 here.
Thank you. Mr. Comich will go to the relevance of the sub-amendment, and he should be able to see that.
Yeah, so the relevance is obviously that the carbon tax is a price imposed on all Canadians and on Canadian companies and on pension funds and on school boards. And there's a cost associated with it, a cost that the public, Canadian citizens and voters, no longer want to bear, which so my sub-amendment is directly what I heard at the doors. People want a carbon tax election because this fund is being billed as an answer to to incentivize climate, the so-called investments, climate spending related. And that's why this is relevant. That's why this matters. Because all of this money, like this taxpayer cash that's going to be sent here, is collected from the carbon tax partially. And then GST is charged on top of the carbon tax. Exactly what my school board said about how punishing the carbon tax is, a tax on tax. Which is why even the school boards in my own province, they want to see a carbon tax election. They want to reject current government policy, which is why I offered a sub-amendment that we not proceed with the main motion or the amendment, and that we proceed first with a carbon tax election, because that's what I heard at the doors, and that's what the public wanted to do. And, I was answering to what the commentary made by Mr. El-Khoury, that conservative policy is only there, for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer, and I want to demonstrate that that's false, actually. Actually, there's actually more articles on the fact. There's lots of people connected to the Liberal Party, including Mark Carney. And I noticed that I was only interrupted when I referenced his name. Typically in an investment firm portfolio like that, they would make about something like 3% off an investment. So 3% of tens of billions of dollars potentially that could be added is a lot of money. And so that's another Liberal who's going to get richer. I agree. He will get richer. Potentially, let's say potentially richer. You never know with investments these days. So potentially get richer. And Canadian pensioners will get poorer. The Canadian public who I meet at the doors will get poorer because they're forced to pay this carbon tax. That's $50 billion of which this investment firm connected to a Liberal. Let's remind ourselves, other people who got rich or at least avoided criminal prosecution was SNC-Lavalin. They avoided criminal prosecution thanks to their connections to the party. And there were 2 cabinet members who were drummed out real fast out of the Liberal cabinet for standing up to the Prime Minister's office, for not wanting to break the rules. One of them did so in solidarity with her friend, of which now there's like more than ample public information about it. I also found an interesting article from the 2021 election I wanted to bring up, because on the point that Mr. El-Khoury made, and this is the headline, Election Insights, Why Rich Canadians Are All In for the Liberals. Canadians who earn more than $100,000 per year are disproportionately likely to vote Liberal on September 20th, published September 10th, 2021, Tristan Hopper. And if you read the article, it's just data. It's just polling data, self-reported data, where the interests of the public lie. So, to my colleague, Mr. El-Khoury, I just wanted to offer that as an opportunity if he wants to later correct the record. In fact, the people most likely to support Liberal government policies are those who have gotten richer and who earn way more than the median Canadian income. And that median Canadian income, those middle-class workers, those blue-collar workers I meet at the doors, they're the ones who are bearing the brunt of the carbon tax policy that's collected at the federal government level, that is then reassigned to people in the green slush fund is a perfect example. The money is sent over there to then be wasted corruptly on programs that either don't work or where there are obvious signs that there's corruption happening at the table, where even the AG had to step in, the RCMP had to step in, we had parliamentary investigations, we had, question period, all of it. And that was obvious from the beginning. Multiple instances, not just one where it happened. And the data shows, those people who have gotten richer have done so, and they massively support the Liberal Party, those on $100,000 plus, disproportionately, the data shows. Another one, I was looking at an investigative journalism foundation that reviewed 1,308 judicial and tribunal appointments by the Liberal government from 2016 to August 2023. You know what it found? 76% of judges who made prior donations before they joined the bench made donations to the Liberal Party of Canada. Who would have, funny that I, like I've said many times in the House of Commons, am not burdened with a legal education, thankfully. I have some of my staff who unfortunately want to pursue legal educations, but funny that so many of them, of those who made donations, so it's not all of them, it's a minority of them, but of those who made donations, 3/4 had been donors to the Liberal Party of Canada. So they did get richer. I'll agree with Mr. O'Curry on that. They did get richer. I will disagree on the food bank, on the federal food program. As I've demonstrated, even the school boards in Alberta disagree with him on that particular point. And so it's interesting, Conservatives being accused of wanting the rich to get richer. I want the Canadian public. I want the voting public, the mom and dad in my riding who work hard, the single dad, the single mom. I want the people who've adopted kids. I want all of them to do better. And they're not. They're not doing better right now. What I heard at my doors when I was door knocking in Mahogany, Mackenzie Town, Auburn Bay, and other parts of my riding is people are fed up and they're at the edge of what they can afford. And many of them are not. They're just going into debt slowly, if they can manage that. I held even a town hall with one of my provincial MLAs who's a provincial minister. And I heard the same thing. I heard people who had lost their jobs, partially related to decisions being made by the Liberal government that was causing them to lose their jobs. Businesses that were uncompetitive because of the carbon tax, that were paying very, very high amounts on their carbon tax bills for their utilities, but also for a lot of products they were sourcing from other parts of the country where they have to be trucked in or brought in by train, and huge cost associated with it. So it has a huge downstream effect when you see these businesses which are just struggling to make by and just trying to get by, but those businesses feed families. Those businesses give an opportunity for families to send their kids their extracurricular activities, to give them opportunities to make sure they have the right clothing for winter, and that is not happening. And like the school board letter I read to members of the committee, in their case, it's tens of millions of dollars, which is being taken directly out of the education of children in the province of Alberta, solely because of the carbon tax. And the school board would gain quite a bit from having a carbon tax election the way my sub-amendment suggests to do. So I wanted to move on some more quotes, because now I'm going to quote, Mr. Vice Chair, while you're in the chair, I'm going to quote to you the NDP in Saskatchewan. I thought it was time maybe to broaden our reach. So this is an article by Murray Mandrick, and he writes the following as a headline: Mandrick, Beck's drive-by bashing of the federal carbon tax hits a pothole. And in the article, it starts to describe the differences between the federal NDP and the provincial NDP, and the differences of opinion that they have. So I just wanted to read just a few parts here. Saskatchewan NDP leader Carla Beck denounced federal policies that have failed this province, Saskatchewan, especially that, and this is her quote, not my quote, that damnable carbon tax. The carbon tax has got to go. Saskatchewan people can't afford it, Beck said. Most living here would agree. And that supply and confidence agreement where federal NDP leader propped up a Liberal minority that kept the carbon tax in place, well, that should have been gone long ago, she said. And there's a comparison to what Premier Moe has been saying and how the two don't make sense. And this is where I think the pothole discussion and the headline is being made. She goes on here, and here is where Murray goes on describing a letter sent by the NDP leader in Saskatchewan. On Monday, Beck unveiled a letter she sent to each federal leader in the wake of Singh's announcement collapsing the supply and confidence agreement and paving the way for a federal election at any time. Even the NDP leader in Saskatchewan would expect that the election would be centered around the carbon tax, a carbon tax election, which is, again, to remind you, Mr. Vice Chair, it is about the sub-amendment we have before us, that we take no actions until we have done so. In the letter, she says that she's outlined a federal agenda that's focused on the needs of Saskatchewan people and that she was seeking commitment to deliver on every single item. And then the first on the list, this is interesting, first on the list was not a school food program. It was not a daycare program. It was not more climate financing so that the Green Slush Fund could be restarted one more time. It was the federal carbon tax needs to be scrapped. That's a quote from the letter. So even the NDP Saskatchewan leader says so, which is interesting. It's a, the Prairie NDP is different than the NDP in other parts of the country, but I found it interesting that even she believed when she sent this letter. This is a very recent event, right? This letter is very recent. It just happened because the supply and confidence agreement was thrown out, even though now seemingly the NDP is joining with the Liberals again to save them on Wednesday at the non-confidence vote. But even the NDP leader in Saskatchewan admits that the next election will be on the top issue, will be a carbon tax election. That's the issue. She knows it too. We know it too. My sub-amendment addresses exactly that point. The next one I want to quote from is the narwhal. And maybe perhaps some will be surprised, but I do read, both left and right, if you can put it in those kind of broad categories. Media, I'll even read the National Observer on occasion because I do want to get the best position from left-wing journalism so that I can model my arguments, maybe even be convinced of something. Who knows? Maybe it will happen one day that I'll be convinced of something, but I still want to see what the arguments are so that I can better understand them and then make the case on behalf of my constituents back home, the residents of Calgary Shepherd, who want a carbon tax election, that I can make the best case for it. And so here's one. It says, what on earth just happened with British Columbia's carbon tax? If you had the carbon tax on your bingo card as the biggest political news in Canada this week, congratulations, you're a winner. The drama started when federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh suddenly announced his party no longer supports carbon pricing that affects individual Canadians. And then it goes on providing quotes from a press conference where the story is related that the federal NDP no longer supports the carbon tax. But maybe they still do. I guess we'll find out on Wednesday. I actually don't know where their position is now. It then quotes the provincial British Columbia leader specifically on a carbon tax election, and he refers to carbon pricing of any type. He says it's an economic disaster and an environmental failure. He says it drives up costs on everything from groceries to gas, hitting families and businesses hard while doing absolutely nothing to lower emissions. And then it goes on in the article to relate hours later, Premier Eby was asked at a news conference whether he, too, had changed his mind on carbon pricing. And then the article relates to the surprise of many, his answer was yes. If the federal government changes the law requiring a consumer carbon tax, we will end the consumer carbon tax in British Columbia. And actually, I highlighted that because that's a direct quote from a press conference. And Premier Eby told reporters, and then he basically, and the article here, the journalist basically says that this is a nod to the federal Conservative Party's position and promise to, and in quotes, axe the tax if his party forms government after the next federal election. So even these journalists understand that the next election will be fought on the single issue of the carbon tax. There's multiple examples of this case, and there's wide agreement that it will happen, which is why I proposed this amendment, the sub-amendment, to the main issue that we not proceed forward until we have it done. So I think that's important. I have another one here I wanted to refer to in the record from the Globe and Mail, how the carbon tax's good economics became terrible politics. And I would even argue with the economic point that's being made here. Yeah. And it says in a subheader, last spring I called the carbon tax dead man walking. The condemned continues its sad march to the execution's chamber, won't be long now. And I mean, it's an opinion piece that appeared in the Globe and Mail, but I think it gets a lot of it right. It appeared on September 16th. And I think the accuracy of the statement is simple, is that the vast majority of the public now has had 9 years of experience with a consumer or retail or a liberal NDP carbon tax, broadly supported by all the parties except for the Conservatives, because we fought against it every step of the way and voted against it, every step of the way the way our constituents wanted us to. And now the public has realized what the true cost that they're bearing, and what they want is this carbon tax election to happen so they can have that final judgment after almost a decade of experiencing an annual $15 a carbon ton hike April 1st every single year. So in this opinion piece, it says politics lives in the realm of the possible. The carbon tax used to make its home in one of the better neighborhoods, but not anymore. Now the eviction notices are piling up. The latest were issued by federal New Democratic Party and the NDP government of British Columbia, Premier David Eby, who heads the first province to bring in a carbon tax, way back in 2008, last week abruptly announced that he'd like to do away with it. He did so while standing next to a grinning Premier Wap Kinew, the NDP Premier of Manitoba, who is also a carbon tax skeptic. So many journalists, and there's just many people just who are commentators, who are voters in our country, they know the same thing I do, which is we need a carbon tax election, which is why my sub-amendment would make it conditional, everything in the amendment and in the main motion, so that the public could have its say. Because I think the public deserves to have a say for different reasons. There are those who don't believe the carbon tax ever made sense. There are those who believe that the cost of living a crisis that it is causing is just not worth the price. There are those who think that a tax on tax makes no sense. They think that being charged a GST on top of the carbon tax also makes no sense. And they would just want to see it end. When even the Alberta Public School Boards Association is saying that it's a tax on tax, not even referring to there is no environmental benefit from the carbon tax, then you know you're on the wrong track. And I think getting us back on track would be to pass a sub-amendment and ensuring that the public gets its say. I'm going to quote further down because this is where the author of this opinion piece talks about, when you go from economics to political science, he says the following: but when we leave the Department of Economics and move over to political science, we discover that rather than choosing a more fuel-efficient car, voters may choose a less pro-carbon tax government. That might include voters who, just a few years ago, were telling pollsters they liked the idea of a carbon tax and who even today say they want major emissions reductions. That's why we need elections, because then those types of voters get to have their say. At the end of the day, we are all here temporary retainers of our particular seats in Parliament until the public decides otherwise. The public gets the final choice. They get to decide. They can change their minds if they want to. That's the great thing about our democracy, that you can make the wrong choice. In this case, it would be voting Liberal would have been the wrong choice in 2021, 2019, and you can change your mind. And my sub-amendment makes it possible for them to have a say. So we could report it back to the House. The House could vote on it and potentially trigger that election. I have another article I wanted to reference as well, because it comes from independent journalists that I subscribe to, because I'm a believer in independent journalism. It's called The Line. If you're not a subscriber, Chair, I would highly encourage you. Jen Gerson and Matt Gurney are two, I think, pretty well-known Canadian journalists. One of them is a Calgarian, and I think another one lives in the Greater Toronto region. Hopefully I get that right. I'm a regular listener, and I read their material as well. So this is from a contributor called Rob Shaw. BC NDP continues fine tradition of panicked flip-flops. From the carbon tax to decriminalization and now involuntary care, Premier David Eby appears to be riding a rapidly shifting mood ahead of the imminent election. And I know we didn't want to talk about the BC election, but we just want to talk about elections generally and the purpose of elections. In the article, he relates how multiple positions previously held by the NDP government have now changed in the span of weeks. They've reversed themselves. And I think the government has an opportunity, if it wanted to save itself. I mean, you don't want to take advice from a conservative, I think, but free advice is to abandon the carbon tax would be a great one. But if you're not going to do it, then pass my sub-amendment so that we can have a vote. And the public, more importantly, can have a vote. The way the public is now going to get to choose in British Columbia whether they want to continue with a carbon tax or not. And seemingly the polls are showing that it's 50-50 right now. But I wonder how many members of the public in British Columbia want an end to the carbon tax, period. And they don't really care how they achieve that. That's their main voting drive. I think for many of us, that is the case. In this particular piece that he wrote, he says, for example, here, after 16 months of intense political pressure and calls for change from everyone from police to healthcare professionals, EB pulled the plug on the idea in April, reversing course to recriminalize drug use in public places. That was the third flip-flop that they reference. And then on the carbon tax specifically, he has lots of quotes from the conservative leader there, like pointing out the reversal of position, which is because of the election, because of the opportunity the public will have to pass judgment. And here it has, I think, a generic quote. It's a reference, I think, to a position. It says, New Democrats and sister moves have always been part of a larger plan. In the case of the carbon tax, born out of a simmering frustration with the Prime Minister's home heating fuel exemption, combined with reading the public mood over affordability concerns. Now, that is insight being provided to the journalist who's writing this piece. And this is Rob Shaw, again, spent 16 years covering BC politics. He now reports for Czech News, writes for Glacier Media, as well as the website Northern Beat, none of which I've checked out, but I got to learn about him through the line. He's also the co-author of a national best-selling book, A Matter of Confidence, and he's host of a weekly podcast and YouTube show, Political Capital. Like even here, he's relating back, obviously, what maybe NDP backroom officials are telling him, staffers, volunteers on the ground are telling him. And here he is. But the pivot is complicated by years of the NDP arguing that the carbon tax was affordable because it returned more money in rebates than people paid in the tax. Okay. New Democrats have described any political party that suggested otherwise as either climate deniers, fearmongers, or both. But now they've reversed themselves. Now, obviously, they've reversed themselves. They've taken the opposite position. And so I find it interesting. I mean, this is an independent journalist. And maybe I'll wrap it up here with just quotes from one of our colleagues, because I can't help myself just to end with... No, I don't want to continue. I want to wrap it up. So these are my final comments here. I just want to quote a wise, great Ken MacDonald, who appeared on CBC's Power and Politics. Everywhere I go, people come up to me and say, you know, we're losing faith in the Liberal Party. Wiser words have never been spoken. I think they will lose seats not just in Newfoundland, not just in Atlantic Canada, but indeed right across the country if they don't get a grasp on this the way I think they should. And if election were called today, I'm not sure if the Liberal Party would actually form the government. And it goes on here. The government has to put a lens on it, a rural lens, for the sake of a better world, and try and come up with a plan that's satisfactory and appealable to people who live in rural. And I think many of our members here are from smaller towns. I've been all over rural Alberta to different parts. I have a lot of friends whose families originate from there. I'm not. I'm a transplant in Canada. I'm one of those Easterners who went and migrated to Western Canada so you can get a job. That was why I moved. But yeah, wise words. I think we at least have maybe someone who'd be willing to vote for my sub-amendment. And with that, Chair, that's my time.
Thank you. Mr. Kimmich, I have the speaking order. I have MP Kaibaga, then MP McLean, MP Kwan, and then MP Radikop. So with this, I will give the floor to Madam Kaibaga. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to do my best to use the last 5 minutes to really point out what just happened in the last two meetings on the Conservative side, and hopefully Canadians can actually get to hear what just happened. First of all, earlier we had a visiting MP, our colleague Halan, who talked about this being shameful. There's a form of rotation happening here today. I don't know what's going on, Chair, but we've had quite a bit of visiting colleagues on the opposite side to filibuster. Perhaps, and I know he's gone now, but I would like to read it into the record for Canadians to know that today Halan attacked our colleague Kwan, making some egregious comments about the work that she's done. But not too long ago, he was congratulating her on the work that she did on S245. And today, he spent his time calling her out and disparaging her, despite the fact that they've spent 3 hours filibustering on a motion that our colleague McGuire, he was the sponsor of this motion, and he spent time filibustering it. Our colleague Halan said he wanted to do this for Canadians, and he lied to them because he just spent time not only disparaging people, not only disparaging colleagues who do.
Madam Kaibaga, we cannot use the word lies. There can be a misrepresentation.
Misleading, disparaging, because there were very strong comments on our colleague who's done a lot of work for us to get here today. And instead of actually moving forward as they promised to Canadians, and if I can quote him, actually, he said, "I think that we need to address any of these other issues very quickly, as they should come in other form of separate bill." And he also said, "I just want to say that there'll be no opposition to recognize those people." And that's very misleading because they've spent a lot of time opposing this. And it's unfortunate because they made a promise to Canadians that they're now changing their tunes on. And I do want to address a couple of comments that they've made here. They've talked about the opposition leader, the NDP leader's pension. The biggest pension to be won here is their leader, who has a $230,000 pension. They talked about housing and Canadians not being able to access housing, and they forgot to mention that the biggest landlord in this country is their leader, Mr. Chair. He's a landlord. He has a pension of $230,000, and they made promises to Canadians to move this bill very quickly, and they've spent 3 hours, Mr. Chair, filibustering it. Shame on them. Not shame on Mrs. Kwan, who's been doing the work here. Not shame on our colleagues who've worked really hard to make sure that we can pass this motion and honor the commitment we made to Canadians. So shame on them for misleading Canadians. Shame on them for disparaging our colleagues who are working really hard. And you know what? You're talking about the vote on Wednesday. All three parties in this House of Commons have said that they will not vote to support this motion to affect the livelihoods of Canadians. Maybe they should be answering as to why their leader does not have security clearance. Canadians need to know that. Canadians need to know, should be asking questions why three parties are deciding that now is not the time to go into an election. Canadians do not want an election. 700,000 Canadians are accessing dental care right now, Mr. Speaker, and they're talking about carbon tax. They're talking about bringing down the government. They're not even able to sit around and answer to the questions of the misleading words when they say, we will not oppose this motion, and yet they spent 3 hours filibustering it. Mr. Chair, it's unfortunate, it's a shame, and I would like to move a motion to adjourn this debate, to adjourn the entire debate. Thank you.
The debate or the meeting?
The meeting, everything. End it.
Okay, could you just repeat your motion again, please? So the members are very clear.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm sure she moved to adjourn the debate.
Let me ask.
I will move to adjourn, Mr. Chair, the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, so I will ask the clerk to take a vote on this one.
So
Mr.
the motion
Clerk, you
is,
want to say the motion?
So the motion is to adjourn the meeting?
Yes.
So Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Chang?
Yes.
Monsieur El Khoury?
Oui.
Madame Kayabaga?
Absolument.
Ms. Dillon?
Oui.
Mr. Kimmich?
Yes.
Mr. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Oui.
Mr. Ridecup?
Yes.
Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe?
Oui.
Ms. Kwan?
Oh, maybe we'll get some work done, yes.
Yes.
So 11-0, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.